You wake up, staring into the dark, wondering what is there. Another sleepless night. After the death of my colleague, I barely slept. We didn't even really know each other, but his death bothered me and I still don't know why. When I came into work, the office felt smaller than usual. Or perhaps it was just the weight of the years pressing down my shoulders, making the walls seem closer than they were. My boss, a figure who had somehow managed to remain unchanged by the passage of time, fixed me with a look that seemed to cut right through the facade I'd been upholding for far too long. "What's wrong with you, Tim? You're screwing up more than usual." His words, sharp as they were, couldn't pierce the fog that had settled over my mind. A fog that had been thickening with each passing day, blurring the line between duty and despair. "I need time off," I said. The words escaped my lips before I could weigh their consequences. The confusion etched on his face mirrored the turmoil within me. "Where are you going to go?" he asked, his voice a mix of concern and incredulity. At that moment, my gaze drifted to an old photo pinned to the wall, a photo that seemed out of place in the sterile environment of our office. It was a snapshot of Graves, row upon row of them, each marking the final resting place of soldiers who had fallen in the last space war, my war, our war. The images stirred something within me, a longing for closure, or perhaps, maybe just an escape from the ghosts that had haunted me since I'd traded my rifle for a badge. "Terra Nova," I whispered, the name tasting like a forgotten dream on my lips. Terra Nova, or Dome City, as some called it, a floating city on an asteroid near Jupiter. It was a place as far removed from the battlefields of our past as one could get, yet somehow it felt like the only destination that could offer me the solace I sought. My boss's confusion deepened, but he remained silent, allowing the unspoken words between us to fill the room. In that silence, I found the resolve I needed to face what awaited me at Terra Nova, to confront the memories I had buried alongside my comrades, in hopes of finding the peace that had eluded me for so long. The decision to leave wasn't just about escaping the failures that seemed to define my career as a detective. It was about seeking redemption, not from the world or the people I had sworn to protect, but from myself. It was a journey I had to undertake, a path I had to walk alone, if I was ever to come to terms with the person I had become. As I stood up to leave, I realized this wasn't just a farewell to my boss or my job. It was a farewell to a life that had been defined by conflict, both external and internal. When I got to Terra Nova, I stood among the graves of my fallen comrades. I felt what can only be described as nothing, but it wasn't nothing. It felt like the absence of nothing. As I realized this, a heavy weight settled over me, pressing down on my chest. The names on the stones blur together, a jumble of letters and symbols that refuse to form coherent thoughts. I reach out, searching for something, anything. I let fingers grasp at empty air. I lit a cigarette and stared at it. Nothing. And then there was the makeshift marker, a piece of a spaceship with names etched into it. It stood before me, had both love and care. And there was a backdrop of the orderly rows of military graves, a stark reminder of the other side of the war. I remember studying those names, feeling a sense of curiosity and confusion. Who were these people? What were their stories? Why did they even matter? Just then, a woman came up to me.
"Watch where you stand, old man. The wretched dead are just beneath you. Asshole, take your shoes off."
I apologized and took my shoes off. I hadn't realized how worn down and dirty my shoes were. She went over to the grave, knelt down and began to pray. Trying to understand it, I knelt down beside her.
"Are you mocking me?"
I couldn't think of what to say. So I just said, no, sorry, it's just that.
No one visits these graves, and the ones that do have no respect for them. They don't understand what they were fighting for, or who they were.
What were they fighting for? I repeated it with an almost mindlessness, with no thought or regard for my words. She looked at me coyly, still wondering what I was doing there.
Well, they were fighting for, you know that thing everyone says matters but no one knows what it is?
Love?
No?
Freedom?
No?
Religion?
No?
Culture?
Flowers.
Flowers?
For the grave.
She looked at me, and she rolled her eyes, and began to pick up the old dead flowers as she searched for new ones. Handing me her things, she said,
Here, hold these, but if you run away with them, just know I'm a pretty good shot with the rock. These will do nicely.
Do? For what?
The grave, obviously.
But they're dead. What do they care?
They don't.
Then why do it?
Because sometimes it's important to remember what we lost, and by remembering it, is imagining it, as though it were still alive.
I had to think for a moment, trying to understand what she was saying.
I know it's hard for most people to understand, but it's not them I'm remembering, but what their lives meant to me.
Why remember it at all, though?
Everyone only remembers them as criminals, scum, outlaws, and rebels. But without rebellion, there would be nothing to fight for. We'd be just like those machines over there,
She pointed to some robots cleaning and gathering up garbage.
dutifully obeying orders.
She paused for a moment, thinking.
Humanity.
Huh?
The answer to your question about what they were fighting for is humanity.
Humanity?
No, not humanity as in humankind. They were fighting for their humanity.
How? They basically started the war. My former soldier coming out, and just as I realized it, I tried to cover my mouth.
They didn't start the war, they just wanted to come home. The moving into the Van Allen belt was considered an act of war. They knew it would be considered an act of war, but they weren't invading marauders.
But they were warned. She glared at me and said,
They were people trying to go home.
That still doesn't explain why they fought. She turned to face me.
Of course it does.
How? They were violent and brutal towards us. My words slipped out, and she looked at me. She took her stuff from my hands, and she glared at me and said,
By that definition, your side wasn't human either.
I didn't know what to say.
Didn't your mom teach you 2 wrongs don't make a right?
My mother died when I was young.
Well, 2 wrongs don't make a right, mister.
I stared at her blankly. Oh, Stroud. I didn't know what to say, and so I stood at attention almost reflexively.
At ease, Mr. Stroud. Do you have a first name?
Oh, it's, Timothy. Well, Tim.
Nice to meet you, Tim.
She began to walk away. I just looked at her, not really sure what to say. Hey, wait, you didn't tell me your name. Stopping, she said.
Come on, it's getting late. And you dress like someone who doesn't know where they'll be sleeping.
I just stood there, uncertain if I should follow her.
My home is a few houses down from here, so we could finish our discussion there.
Look, there's something I should tell you.
You fought for the other side, I know.
You know?
Look, the war is over. You won, so are you coming or not?
I began to follow her, and then she said,
My name is Maria St. Clair.
After making tea, our conversation continued.
In terms of them fighting for their humanity, they didn't want to go on living as outcasts. They needed to take a stand before it was too late. Many were scholars, not soldiers. They knew that it only takes 2 generations for cultures to completely deviate and no longer see the other as kin. After 1 generation had already passed, they feared that if they just stayed up in space, and they might forget who they were or where they came from. They feared that too many generations spent in space would lead to losing their humanity. So they grew desperate and tried to come home. They weren't soldiers, though, and some were more hard-headed than others. Unfortunately, your side never saw it that way, and all of them were plotting together. What followed was one disaster after another.
So you do what? Tend to their graves and try to tell guilt-ridden soldiers their story?
No, at least not for a while. I don't usually talk to people. It may not seem like it, but for some, the war never ended, and the mark of what we were still stays with me. People around here don't talk to me, and I don't talk to them. As for why I spoke to you, my parents were buried just beneath that spot you were standing. Had you not been standing there, I would have said nothing.
Sorry.
Like I said, the war is over.
I know people say that, but for me, sometimes it still feels like yesterday. I spent my entire life trying to move on. I tried to forget, but couldn't. And now?
And now, instead of trying to forget, you came here to remember.
Reading my expression, she paused and studied me for a moment.
Interesting way of forgetting.
I don't want to forget anymore. I just want to feel better. She looked at me, feigning some kind of analysis.
You seem fine to me.
I don't feel fine.
So you want to feel fine. Do you really think that's possible?
I don't know. I know I don't deserve to feel fine. But I just thought I could.
Move on?
Yeah, something like that.
You can't move on for the same reason they can move on.
So what am I supposed to do? Nothing?
He could do that, but it sounds like he tried that. And it didn't work. And something about you strikes me as someone who has trouble doing nothing.
Then what?
You haven't been listening, have you? I've spent my whole life hating the people who killed my family. I spent my earliest years thinking about revenge. I wanted revenge so badly my entire life. Up until I saw you. I knew what you were the moment I saw you. And when I saw you, I don't know, I felt pity.
Pity?
Pity. You can't change what you've done. You'd had to live with that your entire life. And you will continue to live with that until you die. Unless you have a time machine, nothing can change that. Redemption is a better way of saying it. The pain you feel is what redeems you from what you've done. It's the only reason you're not a complete monster in my eyes.
So I came here for nothing?
That depends on what you came here for. If you want forgiveness, then on behalf of them, I've already given it. But if you came here to feel better, and that is something no one can give you. As to why I believe you came here, it's not to end your pain, it's to give it new meaning. But only you can do that.
Oh.
How does anything gain meaning? It comes from what you choose to suffer for. Your whole life, you've only followed orders. Because you've only followed orders, you never had any say in what you suffered for. So, you just suffered. Though it's true you can't end your suffering without ending your life, which I'm sure you've either tried or contemplated, the only way forward is to choose not what you will suffer for, but what you will live for.
I'm nearly 50.
Better hurry then.
I sighed. I gathered my composure, and I began to walk out. She just continued to sit there. I turned to her and said, "Will I ever see you again?"
No.
Thought so. I grabbed my hat as I began to leave. She just smiled as I left.